Is Charlie Manson crazy?
Or whatever that means. Sure, he's crazy as mad as a hatter. I never told anybody to do anything other than what they wanted to do.
And if they wanted to do murder, that was okay with you?
That was none of my business, woman. I'm a convict. I'm an outlaw. I'm a rebel. I'm not a Sunday school teacher. If you're gonna do something, leave something with you. Just like I would tell you, if you're gonna do something, do it well. And leave something with you. Leave a sign to let the world know that you were there.
Well, God, I guess you're my best friend, being I invented you.
What do you want to call me a murderer for? I've never killed anyone. I don't need to kill anyone. I think it.
Do you feel blame? Are you mad? Do you feel like Woods Kebab's referendum? Get friends.
Charlie loves us to be beautiful. And he let us be beautiful.
Sometimes I feel I'm scared to live. Living is what scares me. Dying is easy. Well, I knew I wasn't going to go to the gas chamber because I hadn't done anything wrong. Will I try to help you people destroy me some more? Is that what you're saying?
No.
That's what I'm doing here. I tried to stop Nixon, and I stopped him dead in his tracks. I tried to stop the Vietnam War, and I did it. And all the things I did without breaking the law. The God hooks all the other words up. I'm the Pope. I'm 10 times the Pope. I'm 50 times the Pope. But I'm the Pope in the hills and in the mountains. I'm already out of here. This enclosure here, I'm out of here. My body's stuck here, but my thought is already gone.
People look at you today, 20 years later, and they still have no idea what you're about. Tell me in a sentence who you are.
Nobody. I'm nobody. I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine. And a straight razor if you get too close to me.
Yeah, sex is a reflection. Everything's a reflection of this. When you reflect that, you reflect music. I reflected in music. That's me.
And let me give you all another thing. Will you please?
Yeah.
Everybody says I'm 5'2". When I was arrested, I was 5'7". Then I went down to 5'6". Then I went down to 5 foot. Then I went to 4 feet. Now I'm down to 5'2". Pretty soon I'll be 5 feet. By the time that you all die, I'll be about 3 feet tall.
So how tall are you, Charlie?
5'6".
Okay.
And 3/4.
Charlie, you were real nice. Thank you.
Everyone says, we know what you were doing with all those women. I said, no. You know what you would have been doing with all those women, and you think that's what I would be doing with all those women because that's what you need to think.
Charles Manson was an American criminal, cult leader and musician who led the Manson Family, a cult based in California in the late 1960s. Some of the members committed a series of at least 9 murders at 4 locations in July and August of 1969. During his trial, Bugliosi argued that Manson had intended to start a race war, but interviews and trial witness testimonies insisted that the Tate LaBianca murders were copycat crimes intended to exonerate Manson's friend Bobby Beausoleil from the murder of a family friend, Gary Hinman. Manson himself denied having ordered any murders. Charles Maddox was born on November 12, 1934 to 15-year-old Ada Kathleen Maddox of Ashland, Kentucky. Biological father appears to have been Colonel Henderson Scott of Catlettsburg, Kentucky, against whom Kathleen filed a paternity suit that resulted in an agreed judgment in 1937. Scott had a local reputation as a con artist. He allowed Kathleen to believe that he was an army colonel, although colonel was merely his given name. When Kathleen told Scott that she was pregnant, he informed her that he had been called away on army business. After several months, she realized he had no intention of returning, and Charles never knew his biological father.
My father jumps off the Second World War in the ruptured ducts that were in the little pins and the buttons. In Section 8 in the nut wards, and all the people that have gone crazy.
Your father was crazy?
My father was all men that I've ever met in prison. Mel's one of my fathers. Creepy Carpus is another. I learned something from everyone. The captains, the wardens, I never missed anybody. I learned as much as I could from everybody I could get a hold of. And I've never met anybody that I couldn't learn something from.
In August 1934, before Charles's birth, Kathleen married William Eugene Manson, a worker at a dry cleaning business. Kathleen often went on a drinking spree with her brother Luther Albert Maddox, leaving Charles with babysitters, which offers an insight into his childhood. Later, on April 30, 1937, Kathleen and her husband got divorced after William alleged gross neglect of duty by Kathleen. Charles retained William's last name of Manson. On August 1, 1939, Catherine and Luther, her brother, were arrested for assault and robbery and were sentenced to 5 and 10 years of imprisonment, respectively. Charles was placed in the home of an aunt and uncle in West Virginia. His mother was paroled in 1942, and Charles called the first week after she returned from prison the happiest time in his life. Weeks after her release, the family moved to Charleston, West Virginia, where he continually stayed away from school without leave or explanation, and his mother spent her evening drinking. She was arrested for grand larceny, but not convicted. The family later moved to Indianapolis, where Kathleen met alcoholic Louis Woodson through Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and married him in August 1943. The following details of his childhood are told by Charles Manson himself in an interview with Diane Sawyer. Manson stated that when he was aged 9, he set his school on fire and also got repeatedly in trouble for his absence of school and petty theft. Although there was a lack of foster home placements in 1947, at the age of 13, Manson was placed in the Gibbold School for Boys in Terre, Indiana, a school for male delinquents run by Catholic priests. The school was strict, where punishment for even the smallest infraction included beating with either a wooden paddle or a leather strap. Manson ran away from the school and slept in the woods, under bridges, and wherever else he could find shelter. However, his mother returned him to the school. 10 months later, he ran away to Indianapolis. It was there, in 1948, Manson committed his first documented crime by robbing a grocery store, at first to simply find food. However, Manson found a cigar box containing just over $100, which he used to rent a room on Indianapolis and to buy food. For a time, Manson had a job delivering messages for Western Union in an attempt to live honestly. However, the money was not enough, and he quickly began to supplement his wages through theft. He was eventually caught, and in 1949, a sympathetic judge sent him to the Boys Town, a juvenile facility in Nebraska, and after only 4 days at Boys Town, he and fellow student Blackie Nilsson obtained a gun and stole a car. They used it to commit 2 armed robberies on their way to the home of Nilsson's uncle in Illinois. Nilsson's uncle was a professional thief, and when the boys arrived, he allegedly took them on as apprentices. Manson was arrested 2 weeks later during a nighttime raid on a store. In the investigation that followed, he was linked to his 2 earlier armed robberies and was sent to the Indiana Boys School, a strict reform school outside of Plainfield, Indiana. During his time at the Indiana Boys School, other students allegedly raped Manson with the encouragement of a staff member, and he was repeatedly beaten, which led him to run away from the school 18 times. Manson developed a self-defense technique he later called the insane game, in which he would screech, grimace, and wave his arms to convince stranger aggressors that he was insane.
But there's different colors on different people's backs doing different things. It's a different world. I love the world I live in, too, just like Regan loves the world he lives in.
You love the world you live in.
Most assuredly, it's me.
You love all the pain that you've caused people, all the anguish you've caused.
Oh, I don't know pain. I don't know pain. I have no depth of pain. I have no depth of suffering. I don't know ridicule. I don't know all the bad things. I haven't been punished by you all my life since I was 10 years old. I've been in every reform school you got across the country and used to lay down and have to get my ass whipped till I couldn't walk. Tell me about some pain.
And that's our fault. That's all those people
No
want.
fault. Make strong, good pain. Understand pain. Not bad. Pain's not bad. It's good. It teaches you things. It teaches you things. Like when you put your hand in fire, ow, you know not to do that again. Yeah. Yeah, I understand that.
Tell me how you would describe how bad it was for you in these reform schools.
A child don't know what bad is.
Well, he says in the book that you were raped, that you were beaten constantly.
Come on, man.
That's not true.
That's what he would like to believe. But
So-
there ain't nobody can do that.
So you didn't have a lousy childhood then?
Yeah, I had a terrible childhood. But I'm from here.
In other words, it didn't get to you?
No, I've never sold out. They've never beat me. I haven't been beaten.
Tell me about your terrible childhood.
The child doesn't know what terrible is.
You don't want to talk about it, I tell you.
I'm telling you, a child doesn't know what terrible is.
Give me
What
a little
is terrible,
bit.
man?
Give me a little description of it.
What is terrible? You know, terrible. What does that mean, terrible?
I don't know. You used the word, so I'm trying to get you to
No, I
describe
didn't.
it to
He
me.
used the word in his book. I didn't. I'm not a sniveler. I don't cry. I don't snivel. I don't look for excuses to get off on other things.
After a number of failed attempts, he escaped with 2 other boys. In February 1951, the 3 escapees robbed a filling station while attempting to drive to California in stolen cars, but they were arrested in Utah. For the federal crime of driving a stolen car across state lines, Manson was sent to Washington, D.C. National Training School for Boys. On arrival, he was given aptitude tests, which determined that he was illiterate, but had an above-average IQ of 109, and his caseworker deemed him aggressively antisocial. On a psychiatrist's recommendation, Manson was transferred on October 1951 to Natural Bridge Honor Camp, a minimum security institution in Virginia. His aunt visited him and told administrators she would let him stay at her house and help him find work. Manson had a parole hearing scheduled for February 1952. However, in January, he was caught raping a boy at a knife point. Manson was transferred to the Federal Reformatory in Petersburg, Virginia, where he committed a further 8 serious disciplinary offenses, 3 involving homosexual acts. He was then moved to a maximum security reformatory in Chillicothe, Ohio, where he was expected to remain until his release on his 21st birthday. In November 1955, good behavior led to an earlier release in May 1954 to live with his aunt and uncle in West Virginia. In January 1955, Manson married a hospital waitress named Rosie Jean Willis. Around October, about 3 months after he and his pregnant wife arrived in Los Angeles in a car he had stolen in Ohio, Manson was again charged with a federal crime for taking the vehicle across state lines, and after a psychiatric evaluation, he was given a 5 years probation. Manson's failure to appear at a Los Angeles hearing on an identical charge filed in Florida resulted in his March 1956 arrest in Indianapolis. His probation was revoked and he was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment at Terminal Island in Los Angeles. While Manson was in prison, Rosie gave birth to their son, Charles Manson Jr., who committed an unaliving in the 1990s. During his first year at Terminal Island, Manson received his visit from Rosie and his mother, who were now living together in Los Angeles. In March 1957, the visits from his wife ceased, and his mother informed him Rosie was living with another man. After that, and less than 2 weeks before her scheduled parole hearing, Manson tried to escape by stealing a car. He was given 5 years probation, and his parole was denied. In September 1958, Manson received 5 years parole, and in the same year, Rosie received a decree of divorce, which is a complete court order ending your marriage with all the details about how property is divided, how you will share time with your child, and what, if any, child support is granted. It also states why the marriage is being dissolved. By November of the same year, he was pimping a 16-year-old girl and receiving additional support from a girl with wealthy parents. In September 1959, he pleaded guilty to a charge of attempting to cash a forged U.S. Treasury check, which he claimed to have stolen from a mailbox. The latter charge was later dropped and he received a 10-year suspended sentence and probation after a young woman named Leona Ray Stevens, who had an arrest record for prostitution, made a tearful plea before the court that she and Manson were deeply in love and would marry if Charlie were freed before the year's end, and the woman did marry Manson. Manson took Leona and another woman to New Mexico for purposes of prostitution. resulted in him being held and questioned for violating the Mann Act, which is a federal law that criminalizes the transportation of any woman or girl for the purpose of prostitution or debauchery or for any other immoral purposes. Though he was released, Manson correctly suspected that the investigation had not ended, and when he disappeared in violation of his probation, a bunch of warrants were issued. An indictment for violation of the Mann Act followed in April 1960. In June, following the arrest of the women for prostitution, Manson was arrested in Texas and was returned to Los Angeles for violating his probation on the check cashing charge. He was ordered to serve his 10-year sentence.
In my whole life, I've burglarized a grocery store, stole some nickels and dimes, busted open a stamp machine, stole a few automobiles, and cashed a couple checks. I'm a petty car thief. I've been with prostitutes and bums and winos and all my life. The street is my world. I don't pretend to go uptown and be anything fancy. I can, but I find more real in the world that I'm in than I do the tinsel. And the real world is the one I have to deal with every day, you know. Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
Manson spent a year trying unsuccessfully to appeal the revocation of his probation. Although the Mann Act charge had been dropped, the attempt to cash the treasury check was still a federal offense. Manson's September 1961 annual review noted he had a tremendous drive to call attention to himself, an observation that echoed in September 1964. In 1963, Leona was granted divorce. During the process, she alleged that she and Manson had a son, Charles Luther Manson. In June 1966, Manson was sent for the second time to Terminal Island in preparation for early release. By the time of his release day on March 21, 1967, he had spent more than half of his 32 years in prison and other institutions. This was mainly because he had broken federal law. Federal sentences were and remain much more severe than state sentences for many of the same offenses. Telling the authorities that prison had become his home, he requested permission to stay. Less than a month after his 1967 release, Manson moved to Berkeley from Los Angeles, which could have been probation violation. Instead, after calling the San Francisco probation office upon his arrival, he was transferred to the supervision of criminology doctoral researcher and federal probation officer Roger Smith until the spring of 1968. Smith worked at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, HAFMC, which Manson and his family came to frequent. Roger Smith, as well as the clinic founder David Smith, received funding from the National Institution of Health and reportedly the CIA to study the effect of drugs like LSD and meth on the counterculture movement in San Francisco Haight-Ashbury district. The patients at the clinic became subjects of their research, including Manson and his expanding group of mostly female followers who came to see Roger Smith regularly. Manson received permission from Roger Smith to move from Berkeley to the Haight-Ashbury district. He first took LSD and would use it frequently during his time there. David Smith studied the effect of LSD in rodents, wrote that the change in Manson's personality during his time was the most abrupt Roger Smith had observed in his entire professional career. Manson also read the book Stranger in a Strange Land, a science fiction novel by Robert Heinlein, inspired by the free love philosophy in the Haight-Ashbury during the Summer of Love. Manson began preaching his own philosophy based on a mixture of Stranger in a Strange Land, the Bible, Scientology, and the Beatles, which quickly earned him a following. He may have also borrowed some of his philosophy from the Process Church of the Final Judgment, whose members believed Satan would become reconciled to Jesus and they would come together at the end of the world to judge humanity. Manson had a background in Scientology as he began to study it while incarcerated with the help of a fellow inmate, Lanier Reiner, and in July 1961 listed Scientology as his religion. A September 1961 prison report argues that Manson appears to have developed a certain amount of insight into his problem through his study of this discipline. Another prison report in August 1966 stated that Manson was no longer an advocate of Scientology, Upon his release in 1967, Manson traveled to Los Angeles where he reportedly met local Scientologists, and Manson reportedly completed 150 hours of auditing, which in Scientology is a form of spiritual counseling or therapy designed to help individuals overcome barriers and trauma in their life. His right-hand man, Bruce Davis, worked at the Church of Scientology HQ in London from November 1968 to April 1969. Now let's talk about the family members. Shortly after relocating to San Francisco, Manson became acquainted with Mary Brunner, a 23-year-old graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Brunner was working as a library assistant at the University of California, Berkeley, and Manson, until that point, making his living by panhandling, moved in with her. Manson then met runaway Lynette Fromme, later nicknamed Squeaky, and convinced her to live with him and Brunner. According to a second-hand account, Manson overcame Brunner's initial resistance to him bringing other women in to live with them, as they were in a relationship at the time. Before long, they were sharing Brunner's residence with 18 other women. Manson targeted individuals who were emotionally insecure and socially outcast.
His biggest talent, if you will, an evil talent, was to prey on the very, very young and vulnerable. Some of his followers were as young as 12 years old.
Journalist Linda Deutsch is a longtime observer of Charles Manson and the girls who were drawn to him.
The people who followed Manson were, as he said, these are your children. And they were children from ordinary families who got sucked into a cult. He could say the most inane things, and they would think that it was gospel.
So they were young and they were damaged. Were they insane?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they were insane. I think they were drug-addled at that point.
Established himself as a guru in Haight-Ashbury, which during the Summer of Love was emerging as the signature hippie local. The group were later dubbed as the Manson Family by Los Angeles prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi and the media. Manson allegedly taught his followers that they were the incarnation of the original Christians and that the establishment could be characterized as the Romans. Sometimes around 1967, Manson began using the alias Charles Willis Manson. Before the end of the summer, he had some of his followers begin traveling in an old school bus they had adopted, putting colored rugs and pillows in place of the many seats they had removed. They eventually settled in Los Angeles area of Topanga Canyon, Malibu, and Venice along the coast. In 1967, Brunner became pregnant by Manson, and on April 15, 1968, she gave birth to their son, whom she named Valentine Michael Manson, in a house where they were living in Topanga Canyon. She was assisted by several of the young women in the family.
Growing up, it's average childhood. This whole Manson thing didn't occupy any of my time. It was 99.9% of my life was normal as anybody else's, and there's that one little 1/10% that things would come up. And everybody has that, really. I mean, everybody has a little something in their history that they keep in the closet. Things fell apart in California. I would have ended up in a foster system, and Lord knows what could have happened there. But my grandparents took me in and treated me probably better than their own kids. And George and Elsie gave me what I needed to survive and thrive, and made sure that I was doing the right thing. I think they wanted to get rid of the Manson name because of school and make me a little more normal, so I wasn't being pestered or bullied or that sort of thing, which didn't happen very much. I think 95% of the public looks at Charlie as this mass murdering dog, and I don't believe that that's who he was. I've definitely come to greater peace with him. I don't have the negative feelings that I had at one time. I wish I would have given him a chance. Yeah. I wish I would have at least got to know him a little bit. Yeah.
In his book, Love needs care. About his time at the clinic, David Smith claimed that Manson attempted to reprogram his followers' minds to submit totally to his will through the use of LSD and unconventional sexual practices that would turn his followers into empty vessels that would accept anything he poured. Manson family member Paul Watkins testified that Manson would encourage group LSD trips and take lower doses himself. Watkins stated that Charlie's trip was to program us all to submit. By the end of his stay in April 1968, Manson had attracted 20 or so followers, all under the supervision of Roger Smith and many of the staff at the clinic. Some sources suggest that the family reached the 100 members. However, the core members of Manson's following and the ones that either committed the crimes or stuck around through the whole thing include Charles Tex Watson, Lynette Fromey, Bobby Beausoleil, Mary Branner, Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, and Stephen Grogan. Supervised by his parole officer, Roger Smith, Manson grew his family through drug use and prostitution without interference from the authorities. He was arrested on July 31, 1967 for attempting to prevent the arrest of one of his followers, Ruth Ann Morehouse. Instead of Manson being sent back to prison, the charge was reduced to a misdemeanor and Manson was given 3 additional years of probation. And again in July 1968, he avoided prosecution when he and the family members were arrested while moving to Los Angeles when his bus crashed into a ditch. Manson and members of his family, including Branner and Manson's newborn baby, were found sleeping naked by police, with the baby not being properly protected from the cold. Afterward, he was again arrested and released only a few days later, this time on a drug charge.
He committed crimes of car theft, rape, fraud. He violated almost every term of his parole, and the law enforcement was aware of that. But every time that he got in trouble, he would get picked up, he was miraculously released. Eventually, I became convinced that there was a pattern and that Manson had a relationship with law enforcement.
He picked them up and dropped them off at their destination. A couple of days after that, on April 11, Wilson noticed that the same girls hitchhiking again, and this time took them to his home. Wilson later recalled that he told the girls about our involvement with Maharishi, and they told me they too had a guru, a guy named Charlie, who'd recently came out of jail after 12 years. Wilson then went to a recording session. When he returned later that night, he was met in his driveway by Manson, and when Wilson walked into his home, about a dozen people were occupying the premises, most of them young women. Wilson was initially fascinated by Manson and his followers, referring to him as the Wizard in a Rave magazine article at the time. The two struck a friendship, and over the next few months of the Manson family, mostly women who were treated as servants, were housed in Wilson's residence. This arrangement persisted for about 6 months, and it was then Manson met his right hand on executioner on demand, Tex Watson. Wilson eventually distanced himself from Manson and moved out of the Sunset Boulevard house, leaving the family there, and subsequently took residence at a basement apartment in Santa Monica. Virtually all of Wilson's household possessions were stolen by the family. The members were evicted from his home 3 weeks before the lease was scheduled to expire. When Manson subsequently sought further contact, he left a bullet with Wilson's housekeeper to be delivered with a threatening message. Band manager Nick Grillo recalled that Wilson became concerned after Manson had got into much heavier drug situation, taking a tremendous amount of acid. Writing in his 2016 memoir, Mike Lover recalled Wilson saying he had witnessed Manson shooting a black man with an M16 rifle and hiding the body inside a well. Wilson had been aware that the family were killing people and had been so freaked out he just didn't want to live anymore. He was afraid and he thought he should have gone to the authorities, but he didn't. After getting evicted, Manson established a base for the family at the Span Ranch. In August 1968, the ranch had been a television and movie set for westerns, but the buildings had deteriorated. By the late 1960s, the ranch then derived revenue primarily from selling horseback rides. Female family members did chores around the ranch and occasionally had sex on Manson's order with the nearly blind 80-year-old owner, George Span, with Lynette Fromey being the old man's favorite. Women also acted as guides for him. In exchange, Span allowed Manson and his group to live at the ranch for free. And creation of the cult. What did Manson preach to his followers, and what was his motive for his upcoming murders? The Manson family evolved into a doomsday cult when Manson became fixated on the idea of an anonymous, apocalyptic race war between Americans' black minority and the larger white population. A white supremacist, Manson told some of the family that black people would rise up and kill the entire white population except for Manson and his followers, but that they were not intelligent enough to survive on their own. They would need a white man to lead them, and so they would serve Manson as their master. In late 1968, Manson adopted the term Helter, Skelter, taken from a song on the Beatles' recently released White Album to refer to his upcoming war. The crimes that were committed by Manson and the family are 7 murders, fueled by the idea of starting a race war where they would kill a bunch of white people and put the blame on a group of black people, then go hide underground until everything is done and the black people won, and Manson would become the king of the new world. Bernard Corot. Around the time that the family were living in the Span Ranch, Tex Watson, one of Manson's followers, became involved in drug dealing and robbed a 22-year-old rival named Bernard Corot. Corot responded with a threat to kill everyone at Span Ranch. In response, Manson shot him on July 1, 1969 at a Hollywood apartment. Manson's belief that he had killed Corot was seemingly confirmed by a news report of the discovery of the dumped body of a Black Panther in Los Angeles. Although Corot was not a member of the Black Panther, Manson concluded he had been an expected retaliation from the Panthers. He turned Span Ranch into a defense camp, establishing night patrols by armed guards. Watson would later write, "Blackie was trying to get at the chosen one." Manson also brought in members of the Straight Satan's motorcycle club to act as security. Gary Hinman. Following the trend of Manson asking his followers for money to prepare for the race war, they heard about what happened to Gary Hinman and became interested. 34-year-old Gary Hinman, a music teacher and graduate student at UCLA, had previously befriended the members of the family and allowed some to occasionally stay at his house in Topanga Canyon. According to Atkins, Manson believed Hinman was wealthy and sent her, Brunner, and Beausoleil to Hinman's home to convince him to join the family and turn over the assets he thought Hinman had inherited. The three held Hinman hostage for 2 days in late July 1969. As he denied having any money, Manson arrived with a sword and slashed his face and ear. After that, Beausoleil stabbed him to death, and he and the 2 women took turns smothering him with a pillow. Before leaving the residence, Beausoleil used Hinman's plot to write political piggy on the wall and to draw a paw print, a Black Panther symbol, as an effort to connect them to the murder. However, Beausoleil's account of what happened tells a different narrative on why he did what he did. According to Beausoleil, he came to Hinman's house to recover money paid to Hinman to Mescaline provided to the Straight Satans that had supposedly been bad. Beausoleil added that Brunner and Atkins, unaware of his intent, went along to visit Hinman, and with Hinman's refusing to pay him back, a struggle ensued and he killed Hinman.
Family member Bobby Beausoleil was arrested for the murder of Gary Hinman. On the walls at the scene of Gary's murder were the words "political piggy," and they were written in the victim's blood. Could Beausoleil's arrest have been the motivation for that famous blood-soaked murder spree that began 2 days later on Cielo Drive?
Sharon Tate's house. On the night of August 8, 1969, Watson took Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian to Sharon Tate's house. Watson later claimed that Manson had instructed him to go to the house and totally destroy everyone in it and to do it as gruesome as he can, and told the women to do as Watson's instructed them. The occupants that evening were Tate, aged 26, who was 8.5 months pregnant, and former lover, 35-year-old Jay Spring, and noted celebrity hairstylist, Polanski's friend, 32-year-old Wojciech Frykowski, and Frykowski's 25-year-old girlfriend Abigail Ann Folger, heiress to Folger Coffee Fortune and daughter of Peter Folger. Also present on the property were 19-year-old caretaker William Garretson and his friend 18-year-old Stephen Earl Parent. Polanski, Sharon Tate's husband, was in Europe working on a film. Watson and the 3 women arrived just past midnight. On August 9, Watson climbed a telephone pole near the entrance gate and cut the phone line to the house, thinking that the gate may be electrified or equipped with an alarm. They climbed a brushy embankment to the right of the gate and entered the grounds. Headlight approached the group from within the property, and Watson ordered the women to lie in the bushes. He stepped out and ordered the approaching driver, Parent, to halt. Watson leveled a .22 caliber revolver at Parent, who begged him not to hurt him, claiming that he would not say anything. Watson lunged at Parent with a knife, giving him a defensive flash wound on the palm of his hand that severed his tendons and tore his watch off his wrist, and then shot him 4 times in the chest and abdomen, killing him in the front seat of his white 1965 AMC Ambassador Coupe. Then he told Kasabian to keep watch down by the gate. She walked over to Parent's car and waited. Watson removed the screen and entered through the window and let Atkins and Krenwinkel in through the front door. He whispered to Atkins and awoke Frykowski, who was sleeping on the living room couch. Upon realizing he's awake, he kicked him in the head, and Frykowski asked him who he was and what he was doing there. Watson replied, "I'm the devil, and I am here to do the devil's business." Then on Watson's direction, Atkins found the house with 3 other occupants, with Krenwinkel help, and forced them to the living room. Watson began to tie Tate and Spring together by their necks with a long nylon rope which he had brought, then sling it over the living room ceiling beam. Spring protested the rough treatment of the pregnant Tate, so Watson shot him. At the time, Folger was taken momentarily back to her bedroom for her purse, and she gave them $70. Watson then stabbed Spring 7 times. Frykowski's hand had been bound with a towel and was held by Atkins, but he freed himself and began struggling with Atkins, who stabbed at his legs with a knife. He fought his way out the front door and onto the porch, but Watson caught up with him, struck him over the head with the gun multiple times, stabbed him repeatedly, and shot him twice. Inside the house, Folger escaped from Krenwinkel and fled out the bedroom door to the pool area. Krenwinkel pursued her and caught her on the front lawn, where she stabbed her and tackled her to the ground. Watson then helped kill her. She was stabbed a total of 28 times at the time. Frykowski was alive and struggled across the lawn, but Watson continued to stab him, killing him. Frykowski suffered 51 stab wounds. He had also been struck 13 times in the head with the butt of Watson's gun, which bent the barrel and broke off one side of the gun grip, which was recovered at the scene. In the house, Tate pleaded to be allowed to live long enough to give birth and offered herself as a hostage in an attempt to save the life of her unborn child. Instead, both Atkins and Watson stabbed Tate 16 times, killing her. The coroner inquest found that Tate was still alive when she was hanged with the nylon rope, although the cause of her death was determined as a massive hemorrhage, which is an escape of blood from a ruptured blood vessel. But in Spring's murder, it was found that he was hanged lifeless. According to Watson, Manson had told the women to leave a sign, something witchy. Atkins wrote "pig" on the front door in Tate's blood. Atkins claimed she did this to copycat the Hinman's murders in order to get Beausoleil out of jail, who was in custody for that murder, but others allege it's to start Helter, Skelter, the race war.
Miss Tate, who starred in Valley of the Dolls, was 8 months pregnant and was found in a bikini-type nightgown with a rope around her neck attached to the body of a man. Among the other victims were Hollywood hairstylist Jay Sebring and coffee heiress Abigail Folger. One officer summed up the murders when he said, "In all my years, I have never seen anything like this before."
Well, at the scene, we had one body in a vehicle near the gate, a man and a woman in the main room, and a man and a woman on the lawn in front of the house, all deceased.
On the front door was insurance blood, the word PIG.
25 and just 3.5 years in the job, Bob Burbridge was on call that morning. 6 minutes later, he was at the Tate house, joining other bewildered officers on the scene of unimaginable mayhem.
So I walked in and I came upon a car that was parked kind of askew in the driveway. And I looked into the car and there was a dead body in the car. I looked out on the lawn, about 75 feet away on the front lawn, there were 2 more bodies. We systematically searched the house, room by room, closet, under beds, bedrooms, hallways. And then we looked into the living room and we saw 2 more dead bodies. One was with this beautiful lady laying there in her bra and underwear, full-term pregnant, and with a rope wrapped around her neck, going around a beam in the ceiling in the living room. Oh man, it's hard to... It's so clear in my mind, you know. It's hard. It bothers me.
The house on Shallow Drive, the Tate house, why did they go there that night?
Because Tex had been there before, and he went to a familiar place.
And why did they kill people that night? What did they think they were doing for you?
They freaked out, man. Tex was stoned. He went, everybody was loaded, man.
He said he wasn't. He said he was coming off an LSD trip. He had a little speed.
A little speed. Well, not around me. He didn't have no speed because I wouldn't allow no speed on that ranch. I kick ass over there. I don't allow that stuff on around me. I take a little grass and a little LSD, but none of that is destructive. You can ask any of them other girls that'll tell you the other side of this game. I don't play drugs. So I spent 22 years in prison because I didn't have nobody outside. I can't let somebody that's with me stay in jail. It just ain't, it's not in my makeup, man. I got to get my brother out of jail.
So you needed money to do that.
Well, here's the division between your mind and my mind. Here's where the chamber opens up. When you get in trouble, you go to your mother. You call up mother. I ain't got no mother to call. Well, you go to the bank, draw some money, pay a lawyer. I ain't got no money. I can't go to no lawyer. I go to a lawyer, I ain't got enough money. I got a little money, and anytime anybody knows anything about lawyers, when you got a little money, they're just taking that. They'll take the little money and let you sue them in court. You dig? In other words, like, I don't have enough money to go to the lawyer to get Bobby out. So everybody's standing around, and I said, pay me. Pay me what you owe me, now. And they said, well, how do we do that? I said, get my brother out of jail. He said, how do we do it? I said, I don't know how you do it. I don't care how you do it. Do it, now. Do it. And they said, how do we do it? I said, don't ask me how to do it. I don't want to be no part of no conspiracy. But however you do it and get it done now. And they said, well, we don't know what to do. We'll get a lawyer. And then, here, Leslie and Patty, they said, if we get a lawyer, all they're going to do is lie and take our money anyway.
Did you tell the women to do their witchy things?
I said, if you're going to do something, leave something witchy. Just like I would tell you, if you're going to do something, do it well. And leave something witchy. Leave a sign to let the world know that you were there. Have a good day.
Did you tell them which words?
No.
Pig?
No.
Helter, Skelter?
Nope.
Arise?
Nope. It's not my vocabulary. That's not my generation. I keep telling you that.
Leslie said, in the car on the way to the La Bianca house, you said, this time, make sure they're not scared like last night.
Oh, no. It may have been something like this. Yeah, I remember something like that, but I don't remember exactly the right words.
Did you tell them to mutilate so that it would be memorable, so that people would know something was going on?
Did
you tell them to do it in a memorable way?
Hey, I told you what I told them. If you're going to move and you're going to do something, do it with your soul and your heart. Do it right, man. Don't half-step on it.
Did they do it right?
I don't know. That's up to them. They live with that. They're responsible for their actions. I'm responsible for my actions.
Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. On August 10, 1969, the night after the Tate murder, Manson and 6 of the Manson family members, Leslie Van Houten, Stephen Grogan, Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Greenwinkle, and Charles Watson, committed another murder. And like the Tate murder, Manson joined in on the LaBianca murder because he felt that there was not enough panic among the victims from the Tate murder. Manson and the family members drove around looking for murder victims. When they arrived in the neighborhood of a home in which they had attended a party a year prior, the neighborhood home belonged to a successful grocery company owner, Lino LaBianca, and his wife Rosemary. There, Manson claimed that he approached the home alone and returned later to bring Watson along. When Manson and Watson were in the residence, they tied up the LaBianca couple with a lamp cord and with pillowcases covering their heads. Manson reassured the couple that they would not be hurt and that they were being robbed. All the cash was collected and the bounded Rosemary was returned to her room. Soon after, Manson left the residence. Van Houten and Greenwinkle entered the premises with the instruction from Manson to kill the couple and to follow Watson's orders.
We pulled up to the house. Manson went in the house.
Manson apparently got in through an unlocked patio door and got the drop on the LaBiancas. He told them that it was just going to be a robbery and that he wouldn't harm them.
Manson came back out. And he selected Pat and I to go in the house.
And at some point, I remember him telling Watson that all of us were to do something.
Watson began stabbing Lino multiple times when Lino cried out, and at the same time, in the bedroom, Rosemary began to swing the lamp still attached to the cord wrapped around her neck. Van Houten and Krenwinkel yelled for Watson's aid, so he stabbed Rosemary multiple times, then gave the knife to Van Houten, who continued to stab Rosemary. Rosemary was stabbed a total of 41 times by Watson, Van Houten, and Krenwinkel. Watson returned to the living room and continued to stab and kill Lino. Krenwinkel carved the word war into Lino's stomach, stabbed Lino multiple times, left a carving fork sticking out from his stomach, and left a knife in Lino's throat. Lino was stabbed a total of 26 times. On the walls of the living room, "Death to Pig" and "Rise" were written in Lino's blood, and on the fridge door, a misspelled "Helter, Skelter" was smeared.
Pat and I walked into the house, and Pat got a knife out of the kitchen. And we were told to take Mrs. LaBianca into the bedroom. And we could hear Mr. LaBianca being stabbed. You could hear it. You could hear the guttural sounds of him dying. And I tried to hold Mrs. LaBianca down while Pat stabbed her, and she hit her collarbone and the knife bent. I ran out of the bedroom and called to Tex. At that point, Tex turned me around and handed me a knife, and he said, "Do something." I went back in the bedroom and I stabbed her numerous times in the back.
Then Krenwinkel went around the house. She wrote the word "Rise" above the inside part of the front door, on the living room wall, "Death to Pigs," and then on the refrigerator, also in Lino's blood, "Helter, Skelter."
Knowing that later on, the couple's daughter would forgive Watson after exchanging some letters while he's in prison, is disturbing with the details of what he did to both of them that night. Frank Strather, Rosemary's son from a prior marriage, returned from a camping trip and found it suspicious that the shades were drawn. He also found it suspicious that Lino's speedboat was still parked in the driveway. Strather called his sister to alert her, and she came with her boyfriend, Joe Dorgan. Dorgan and Strather entered the home through the side door and found Lino's body. LAPD was alerted, and I believe they didn't let the sister go inside and see the scene.
The very next night, the Manson family struck again. This time, Charles Manson took a far more direct role, tying up the residents of this property, Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, but telling them they would not be hurt, just robbed. Then he set his disciples on them and left. Those disciples strangled and stabbed the couple, Rosemary, 41 times before they carved the word war into Lino's stomach and used his blood to write Helter Skelter on the fridge door.
Bureau and I worked all night. It was midnight, and the city news ticker suddenly jumped to life, and it said there had been another 2 murders.
Lino LaBianca was the grocery store owner, and his wife was Rosemary LaBianca. They were totally innocent victims. The killers had written in blood of the victims, Helter Skelter, piggies, stuff like that, on the doors and on the walls.
Everybody thought that it was a copycat. It was very similar. There were blood scrawlings on the walls, and police had nothing. The LaBiancas were apparently just chosen at random. Manson actually had known the Sharon Tate house and knew that somebody famous lived there, but not the LaBianca house.
On August 9, 1969, the Tate murder became national news after the Polanski housekeeper, Winifred Chapman, arrived for work that morning. On August 10, detectives of the Los Angeles County Sheriff Department, which had jurisdiction in the Hinman case, informed Los Angeles Police Department detectives assigned to the Tate case of the bloody writing at Hinman's house. According to Vincent Bugliosi, because detectives believed that the Tate murder were a consequence of a drug transaction, the Tate team initially ignored this and other evidence of similarities between the crimes.
Because there was a feud between the LAPD and the LA sheriffs, they never spoke to each other. And the only way the cops solved the case was because Blabbermouth Susan Atkins, who was a member of the Manson family, boasted to her cellmates, "Hey, you know who killed Sharon Tate? I did," and then repeated it to the grand jury, and once the grand jury heard it, they indicted Manson and the rest of the gang.
During the Tate autopsy, detectives working on the Hinman case noticed similarities in the weapon used, the stab wounds, and the writing in blood on the walls. They brought the information to detectives working on the Tate murder. The La Bianca crime scene was discovered at 10:30 p.m. on August 10, approximately 19 hours after the murders were committed, when 15-year-old Frank Struther, Rosemary's son from a prior marriage, returned from a camping trip. On August 16, the sheriff's office raided Span Ranch and arrested Manson and 25 others as suspects in a major auto theft ring that had been stealing Volkswagen Beetles and converting them to dune buggies. Weapons were seized, but because the search warrant had been misdated, the group was released a few days later. In a report at the end of August, the La Bianca detectives noted a possible connection between the bloody writing at the La Bianca house and the singing group The Beatles' most recent album. Still working separately from the Tate team, the La Bianca team checked with the sheriff's office in mid-October about possible similar crimes. They learned of the Hinman's case and also learned that the Hinman detectives had spoken with Beausoleil's girlfriend, Latzinger. She had been arrested a few days earlier with members of the Manson family. Later, a joint force of National Park Service rangers and officers from the California Highway Patrol and the County Sheriff's Office, federal, state, and county personnel had raided both the Myers and Barker ranches after following evidence left when family members had burned an earth mover owned by Death Valley National Monument. The raiders had found stolen dune buggies and other vehicles and arrested 24 of people, including Manson. A highway patrol officer found Manson hiding in a cabinet beneath bathroom sink. Following up leads a month after they had spoken with Latzinger, La Bianca detectives contacted members of a motorcycle gang Manson tried to recruit as bodyguard while the family was at Span Ranch. Meanwhile, a dormitory mate of Susan Atkins informed LAPD of the family's involvement in the crimes. Keep in mind that all these events took several months, and the case was solved after Atkins, who was in jail on unrelated charges, got transferred to Cybele Brand Institute, a detention center in Monterey Park, California, and began talking to bunkmates Rooney Howard and Virginia Graham and bragged about her involvement. On December 1, 1969, the LAPD announced warrants for the arrest of Watson, Greenwinkle, and Kasabian in the Tate case. The suspect involvement in the La Bianca murder was noted. Manson and Atkins, already in custody, were not mentioned. The connection between the La Bianca case and Van Houten, who was also among those arrested near Death Valley, had not yet been recognized. Watson and Greenwinkle were already under arrest, with authorities in McKinney, Texas, and Mobile, Alabama, having picked them up on notice from LAPD. Kasabian voluntarily surrendered to authorities in Concord, New Hampshire, on December 2, after she was informed that the warrant was out for her arrest.
The following week, he and his followers jumped into their dune buggies and set out on the road, heading for the desert.
Physical evidence as Greenwinkle's and Watson's fingerprints, which had been collected by LAPD at Tate's house, was augmented by evidence recovered by the public. On September 1, 1969, the distinctive .22 caliber high-standard buntline special revolver Watson used on parent Ring and Frykowski had been found and given to the police by Stephen Wee, a 10-year-old boy who lived near the Tate residence. Acting on Los Angeles Times newspaper account, a local ABC television crew quickly located and recovered the bloody clothing discarded by the Tate killers. Also, a knife was found behind the cushions of a chair in the Tate living room, which was apparently that of Susan Atkins, who lost her knife in the course of the attack. The trial began on June 15, 1970. The prosecution main witness was Kasabian, and since she, by all accounts, had not participated in the killings, she was granted immunity in exchange for testimony that detailed the night of the crimes. Originally, a deal had been made with Atkins, in which the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty against her in exchange for her grand jury testimony, in which the indictments were secured. Once Atkins changed the testimony, the deal was withdrawn, and because Van Houten had participated only in the La Bianca killing, she was charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 of conspiracy. Originally, Judge William Kinney had reluctantly granted Manson permission to act as his own attorney because of Manson's conduct, including violating a gag order and submission of outlandish and nonsensical retrial motions. The permission was withdrawn before the trial started. Manson filed an affidavit of prejudice against Kinney, who was replaced by Judge Charles Older. On Friday, July 24, the first day of testimony, Manson appeared in court with an X carved into his forehead. He issued a statement that he was incompetent to speak or defend himself and had X'd himself from the establishment world. Over the following weekend, the female defendants did the same on their own foreheads, as did most of the family members within another day or so.
I've got a curiosity. Can I ask you a question? Remember you had an X years ago and you changed it now to a swastika?
No, I never changed. It's been the same thing all the way along.
Wasn't it always an X?
No, it never was.
What's it stand for?
It stands for whatever I mean it to stand for, and whatever I make it stand for, and whatever I want it to stand for.
But you didn't one time say you were Xing yourself out?
No, that was your newspapers that gave you that.
What does it stand for you?
It stands for many things. And it would take 2 or 3 weeks to explain all the things that I've built.
On October 5, Manson was denied the court permission to question a prosecution witness whom defense attorneys had declined to cross-examine. Leaping over the defense table, Manson attempted to attack the judge. Wrestled to the ground by bailiffs, he was removed from the courtroom with the female defendants, who had subsequently risen and began chanting in Latin.
At the peak of his orchestrated bedlam, Manson tried to attack the judge, declaring he should have his head cut off. Manson was captured by the bailiff, the moment captured by the court artist.
He talked a good game, made himself totally sympathetic, didn't admit that he did anything.
Did you feel any sympathy for him?
No.
Did you find him charismatic?
No.
Did you think he was crazy?
Oh, yeah, he was insane. He was malignantly insane. It was quite a time.
Charlie jumped over the table with a pencil in his hand and was going after Judge Holder, and a young bailiff tackled him. Later, the judge told me that he had a gun up there and would use that if necessary. And hey, the judge was a flying tiger ace in World War II. He was nobody to mess with.
The prosecution argued the triggering of Helter Skelter was Manson's main motive. The crime scene's bloody white album reference, Helter Skelter, written by Susan Atkins, and the writing of pigs was correlated with the testimony about Manson's prediction that the murders black people would commit at the outset of Helter Skelter would involve the writing of pigs on walls in the victim's blood. The defendant testified that the writing in blood on the walls was to copy that of Hinman's murder scene, not an apocalyptic race war.
I went to the Spahn movie ranch, and there were a couple of guys there called Paul Watkins and Brooks Poston, and they said to me that Manson told them that the Beatles' White Album was secret messages to him, Charlie, to tell the family that there was going to be a black-white revolution.
Helter Skelter was what Manson called the upcoming race war that was prophesied to him through the Bible, through Beatles lyrics. And what he predicted was that the blacks were going to finally rise up against the oppressive whites and wipe them out and then take over the planet.
According to Bugliosi, Manson directed Kasabian to hide a wallet taken from the scene in the women's restroom of a service station near a black neighborhood. However, as co-prosecutor Stephen K. later pointed out, the wallet was actually left about 20 miles away in a predominantly white neighborhood, Ilmar.
Bugliosi argued that the murders were committed because the race war wasn't happening fast enough. And Manson got impatient and wanted to ignite the race war by framing the Black Panthers by leaving signs at the murder scenes. It took me a while to start thinking that Bugliosi was not somebody to be trusted and had nefarious motivations.
Vincent Bugliosi didn't need Helter Skelter to convict anyone except Charles Manson, because absent Helter Skelter, there was no evidence of any criminal intent on Manson's part.
That's the district attorney's motive. That's the only thing he could find for a motive to throw up on top of all that confusion he had. There was no such thing in my mind as Helter Skelter. Helter Skelter was a song, and it was a nightclub. We opened up a little after-hours nightclub to make some money.
Bugliosi was asked by journalists if he believed that Manson really believed in this crazy helter-skelter scenario, and he said that he didn't believe that he was convinced that the girls did, but that Manson was too smart. It was just something he used.
On November 16, the prosecution rested its case. 3 days later, after arguing tender dismissal motions, the defense stunned the court by arresting as well, without calling a single witness. Shouting their disapproval, Atkins, Winkle, and Van Houten demanded their rights to testify. In chambers, the women's lawyer told the judge their client wanted to testify that they had planned and committed the crime and that Manson had not been involved. By arresting their case, the defense lawyers had tried to stop this. In the prosecutor's view, it was Manson who was advising the women to testify in this way as a means of saving himself. Speaking about the trial, in a 1987 documentary, Winkle said the entire proceedings were scripted by Charlie. The next day, Manson testified. The jury was removed from the courtroom. According to Vincent Bugliosi, it was to make sure Manson's address did not violate the California Supreme Court's decision in People v. Aranda by making statements implicating his co-defendant. However, Bugliosi argued Manson would use his hypnotic powers to unfairly influence the jury. Speaking for more than an hour, Manson said, among other things, that the music is telling the youth to rise up against the establishment. He said, "Why blame it on me? I didn't write the music." Manson also stated, "I don't recall ever saying, get a knife and a change of clothes and go do what text says."
Even in custody, Manson was controlling his women, instructing them to disrupt every step of the court process. As for his own behaviour, Manson attempted to hypnotise witnesses, including former police officer Bob Burbridge.
And that was the craziest thing, because I was sitting there testifying against him, and they said, "Don't look at him." And I couldn't help but look at him because he was giving me goo-goo eyes, you know. He's going like this, you know. And I almost started laughing at him, you know. He was just a little weaselly guy.
The jury took a week to deliberate and came to a verdict of guilty for all charges of murder and conspiracy for all 4 defendants, including Atkins, Winkle, Van Houten, and Charlie himself. During the penalty phase of the trial, the jury declared the penalty of death on January 25, 1971. However, because of California's Supreme Court ruling in 1972, the death penalties for all defendants were commuted to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Manson was admitted to state prison from Los Angeles County on April 22, 1971 for 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder for the death of Abigail Ann Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, Stephen Earl Parent, Sharon Tate Polanski, Jay Spring, and Leon Rosemary LaBianca. Manson was denied parole 12 times.
Charles Manson is serving a life sentence for 7 of the most infamous and gruesome murders in American history, the 1969 Tate LaBianca murders. The victims were butchered, their blood was used to write messages, and while Manson didn't kill any of the victims, he was convicted of being the mastermind behind the twisted killing spree, which was carried out by his devoted followers.
The jury found all of them guilty and sentenced them to death.
The death penalty was overturned in 1972 by the California Supreme Court. So every one of these defendants had their sentence commuted from death to life.
He never heard you express remorse. Have you never felt it?
Remorse for what? You people have done everything in the world to me. Doesn't that give me equal right? I can do anything I want to you people at any time I want to, because that's what you've done to me. If you spit in my face and smack me in the mouth and throw me in solitary confinement for nothing, what do you think's going to happen when I get out of here? Guilty. I wouldn't do anything that I felt guilty about.
You don't feel guilty at all?
There's no need to feel guilty. I haven't done anything I'm ashamed of. Maybe I haven't done enough. I might be ashamed of that, for not doing enough, for not giving enough, for not being more perceptive, for not being aware enough, for not understanding, for being stupid. Maybe I should have killed 400 or 500 people, then I would have felt better. Then when I felt like I really offered society something. You know, if I wanted to kill somebody, I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing. It'd be just like walking to the drugstore. I don't fit in society, and I am incompetent. I'm definitely incompetent.
No, that's not what I said.
Well, I say that. I say that. No, there's nothing wrong with being incompetent because you don't have to do as much. If you're competent, then you got a lot to do, see.
You write that in all your conversations with Charles Manson, he never expressed remorse.
Have you seen any today? I mean, perhaps he believes totally in his own mind that he's not guilty.
You guys got this stuck in your head that I've murdered somebody. You've got it stuck in your brain that I murdered somebody. What do you want to call me a murderer for? I've never killed anyone. I don't need to kill anyone. I think it. I have it here.
Hello. Sharon Tate's younger sister, Deborah, was just a teenager when she confronted the madman who had ripped her life apart. When you first came face to face with members of the Manson family, what was that like? What did you see? What did you feel?
I was 16 years old, and Charlie was in the county jail, as were most of the members in the LA County Jail. I had myself smuggled in and looked into his eyes, and there was a lack of emotion. He didn't say a word. I didn't say a word, but I saw what I saw.
You've said in the past that you thought you looked into the eyes of evil.
I did, absolutely. I'm still looking into the eyes of evil.
But in those letters that he wrote to you...
Did he say he was sorry? No.
Did he say that he did it?
No. He said he's an outlaw and he lives by the outlaw rule, which is he's not going to volunteer information.
At the time, during the trial, the three family members loitered near the entrance of the courthouse, and when the group established itself in visual on the sidewalk, some members were sheathed hunting knives that, although in plain view, were carried legally.
We discovered that when the girls were sent new dresses by other girls who were out there, like Squeaky, they had sewed tabs of LSD into the hems of the dresses. Quite clever.
Each of them was also identified by the X on their forehead. Some family members attempted to dissuade witnesses from testifying.
The Manson women were camped on the sidewalk outside the Hall of Justice, the women who had lived at the ranch, and they were saying they would remain there until Manson was freed. They slept there and lived there.
On the first day of the trial, Squeaky was sitting outside the courtroom, and as I approached, she said, "Hi, Ivor," because by that time she knew me. And she said in a kind of little girl, squeaky voice, "Do you know what it feels like to have a sharp knife put down your throat?"
Prosecution witnesses Paul Watkins and John Flynn were both threatened. Watkins was badly burned in a suspicious fire in his van. Former family member Barbara Hoyt, who had overheard Susan Atkins describing the Tate murder, family member Ruth Ann Morehouse, agreed to accompany the latter to Hawaii. There, Morehouse allegedly gave her a hamburger spiked with several doses of LSD. Found drugged, Hoyt was taken to the hospital, where she did her best to identify herself as a witness in the Tate LaBianca murder trial. Before the incident, Hoyt had been a reluctant witness. After the attempt to silence her, she changed her mind. In 2013, Charlie was at it again when in an interview with Rolling Stones magazine, Afton Burton, who called herself Star, claimed that she and Manson were in a relationship, telling the reporter, "I'll tell you straight up, Charlie and I are going to get married. When that will be, we don't know, but I take it very seriously. Charlie is my husband. Charlie told me to tell you this." At the age of 19, Star had moved from Illinois to Corcoran, California, to be near the prison where Manson was incarcerated, and she also ran multiple websites aimed at securing his release.
I am Charles Manson's wife.
Wife? Are you married?
We are technically, the paperwork hasn't gone through yet, but we already consider each other to be husband and wife.
Are you in love?
Yeah.
Did you...
Why would I marry somebody if I was...
Well, I'm just asking.
Okay.
You know, people get married for all kinds of different reasons in this country.
I guess so. Well, I wouldn't.
When we first met Star several years ago, she told us that she was drawn to Manson because of his environmental philosophy that he calls ATWA.
ATWA stands for air, trees, water, and animals.
Did you know that 900 redwood trees get cut down every day? 900 redwood trees at 1,000 years apiece. That's 900,000 years of sunlight you're taking off of this planet.
On January 1, 2017, Manson was held at Corcoran Prison when he was rushed to Mercy Hospital in downtown Bakersfield, gastrointestinal bleeding. A source told the Los Angeles Times that Manson was very ill, and TMZ reported that his doctor considered him too weak for surgery that normally would be performed in cases such as his. He was returned to prison on January 6, and the nature of his treatment was not disclosed, and on November 19, he died from cardiac arrest resulting from respiratory failure brought on by colon cancer at the hospital.
Breaking news, Charles Manson, the infamous cult leader who led a string of murders in the 1960s, is dead.
After his death, 3 people stated their intention to claim Manson's estate and body. Manson's grandson, Jason Freeman, stated his intent to take possession of Manson's remains and personal effects. Manson's pen pal, Michael Channel, claimed to have Manson's will dated February 14, 2002, which left Manson's entire estate and Manson's body to Channel. Manson's friend, Ben Gorky, claimed to have a Manson will dated January 2017, which gave the estate and Manson's body to Matthew Roberts, another alleged son of Manson. In 2012, CNN ran a DNA match to see if Freeman and Roberts were related to each other and found that they were not. According to CNN, 2 prior attempts to DNA match Roberts with genetic material from Manson failed, but the results were reportedly contaminated. On March 12, 2018, the Kern County Superior Court in California decided in favor of Freeman in regard to Manson's body. Freeman had Manson cremated on March 20, 2018, putting an end to the story of who claimed and believed he was Jesus, Charles Manson.
The Manson case will always be, if nothing else, a footnote to the 60s. People will say, and while in the 60s Martin Luther King was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, hippies were roaming San Francisco, the Vietnam War was raging, and in Los Angeles, on one horrible weekend, a man named Manson ordered his followers to kill all these people.